I was visiting with people, so I didn't hear if Tara made an announcement about our church conference, charge conference tonight. You're all invited to that. There is a business meeting to it, but most of our business meeting tonight, or this afternoon at 2 o'clock, is going to be stories about various ministries in our congregation of how they've changed people's lives. And I'm looking forward to hearing Dave Kimberly tell me a little bit about his testimony and his story. We have a couple of youth who, if they have their nerve, are going to tell us about a conversion experience that they just had when they went to the Judgment House at El Dorado. So we're hoping to hear their stories. And we'll hear about what Men's Breakfast has been doing and some other things. And so it's not just going to be a business meeting. It'll be a chance to hear what this congregation is doing to change lives. So it should be a good time. Our scripture this morning, Mark chapter 9, starting with verse 14. Now they had just come down from the Mount of Transfiguration. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and they ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. And a man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground and he foams at the mouth, he gnashes his teeth and he becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "You unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." And so they brought him, and when the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and he rolled around, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It is often throwing him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father explained, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. And after Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And he replied, "This kind can come out only by prayer." I don't have my screen on the back, but that's not a big deal. This morning's message is timely because so many of us at one time or another struggle with unbelief. Is that true? That, you don't want to say amen to that, but it is an amen, isn't it? It's true. And if there's any prayer in the scriptures that we can identify, it's the one, "I believe, help my unbelief." And so this morning I want to look at that and to look at that story. What we're told is that Jesus has just been up on the Mount of Transfiguration. And here the disciples, Peter, James, and John, and Jesus have just had what we call a mountaintop experience, literally, up on the mountaintop. But then they have this incredible encounter with God where God speaks to them out of the cloud and says, "This is my beloved son, listen to him." They saw Moses and Elijah. And then on the way home, on the way down the mountain, Jesus was probably explaining to them how he was going to come again and what it meant and why he had to die on the cross and all of this stuff. And so here the disciples are excited, they're happy. It's like having gone to a Christian retreat or a church camp, okay? and you've gone to Women of Faith, or you've gone to Ashram or a Walk to Emmaus, and you're coming back and you're pumped, right? I mean, you're excited, your faith is vibrant, and everything is going great. And what's the first thing that happens to Jesus and these three disciples when they get down to the bottom of the mountain? They haven't even had a chance yet to take a shower and unpack their suitcase. And now all of a sudden, they're facing problems. And that Jesus sees that his disciples and the scribes, the religious leaders, that they're having this argument. And so what are they arguing about? I mean, Jesus can't even go away for a day before, people start arguing and fighting again. And so he asks them, and he says, what are you arguing about? And, he's expecting the disciples to answer him. And we find out what the story was, is they've been arguing because this father has brought his son. And his son has a demon. It's called a demon that makes him deaf and mute so that he can't speak. But it also seems to describe that this boy has grand mal epileptic seizures along with it. And that he falls to the ground, he foams at the mouth, he goes into convulsions. And to make matters worse, this spirit tries to kill him. He throws him into fire, or he throws him into the water to drown him. And this desperate father has brought his son looking for Jesus, and the disciples tried to help. They tried to cast out this demon, and they failed. And so now the scribes, the religious leaders, are attacking the disciples for having failed to help. And so this is what the argument was that was going on. So let's look at who the key players are in this thing. The first one is the Father. We can identify with this father on several levels. In that this guy's desperate. I don't know where he's from. We don't know if he's from Jerusalem or if he's from Capernaum, or maybe he's from one of the cities of the Decapolis or from the coastline. We don't know if he's even a Jew or whether he's a Gentile. We don't know. But he has a problem. His son whom he loves, and you can identify with that, right? If you've ever had a sick child, you know what this guy is feeling. He has a son whom he loves who is desperately ill. He has this demon which is trying to destroy him. And you can imagine what this guy has done. He's gone to all the doctors. He's gone to the hospitals. He's called all the consultants that he could. He's gotten on the computer and he's done his studies to see what's been going on and what the disease is. He's been on the telephone. He's talked to his all of his family members and anybody who can give him any information. He's spent all of his money. He's been on the phone arguing with insurance companies about how they're going to pay for this stuff. It goes on and on and on. I mean, he's been doing everything he could. He's gone to church. He's prayed. He's talked to the rabbis and to the religious leaders. He's prayed. He's gone to the priests. He's done all of this, and nothing has worked. And then somehow he hears about Jesus. We don't know how he heard, but somehow he heard about Jesus. He had heard that Jesus could heal, and so he's desperate. He's doing everything that he can, and so he starts to make the way to Capernaum where he knows that Jesus lives. And he gets to Capernaum and he asks and he says, where is Jesus? Where is this healer? And what do they tell him? Well, he's north. He went to Caesarea Philippi, we think, but we're not sure. But that was the last direction we saw him. And so he heads another 25 miles north. And every person that he meets on the path, he says, have you seen Jesus? I'm looking for Jesus. And they say, keep going that way. And he keeps going north. And finally he gets to Caesarea Philippi and he asks, where's Jesus? And what do they tell him? You just missed him. He's up on the mountain. But his disciples are there. And his disciples say, well, maybe we can help. But can you identify with this father? Sure you can. You've had people who've been sick, and you desperately try to get them help. And that's how this father is feeling. He's desperate. He's powerless. He's frustrated. Then you have the 9 disciples. These guys mean well. Now, the other three, Peter, James, and John, they're up with Jesus having this, religious experience at church camp. They're having this great time. And here are the 9 who are left behind, to take care of things. And this man shows up, desperate, but they're feeling pretty confident because Jesus had sent them out on a mission earlier. And he says, I want you to cast out demons. I want you to give sight to the blind. I want you to proclaim the good news. And they'd done it. They had fed the 5,000. They had fed the 4,000. And so here comes this desperate man who has this son who has a demon, and they see what's going on, and they say, well, we can help. And so they try to cast out this demon, and it doesn't work. Now, can you imagine their frustration? Have you ever tried to help somebody, and all you ever did was make the situation worse? That ever happened to anybody else beside me? You're trying to be helpful, and all you end up doing is exasperating the situation. And that's what's happening with these disciples. They're trying to help, but it's just getting worse instead of getting better. This demon evidently is an extremely arrogant demon, and so it keeps casting this boy into another fit, and he's foaming at the mouth, and it's just making this huge scene. And so now the religious leaders, the scribes, start to criticize them. What right do you have to do this? What authority makes you think that you could be of any help? And so they're being criticized. They're being piled on. Here they're trying to help, and instead all people are doing is just insulting them. Has that ever happened to you? Not only did you fail to help, but then people told you that you were an idiot for trying to help. And so you're getting piled on. Everything they do fails and nothing works. And so the disciples, they feel frustrated, they're powerless, they're confused. Why didn't it work? We did it just a few weeks ago. And so they don't understand what's going on, and then there's insult to injury. Then you have the scribes. Now, we have a negative view of these guys, and in this story we should. The positive view of these guys is their job is to make sure that the Torah is taught correctly. And there's nothing wrong with oversight. In fact, that's a good thing to have oversight. And that's their job, is to make sure that the rabbis teach Torah and not something strange or something else, and to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But these guys have gone overboard. They have been following Jesus, and they have probably been coming from as far away as Jerusalem, but they're not following Jesus in order to learn from him. They're following Jesus in order to attack him, to criticize him, to challenge him, to say that he doesn't have the authority to do what he's doing, that he doesn't have the proper credentials. And so now when Jesus' disciples are trying to do what the rabbi does, they're attacking the disciples. And one of the things that's perhaps most disturbing about this is that these scribes, they see the story unfolding of this desperate father with his sick son, and rather than having compassion upon this father and his son, they just see them as a case study and professional detachment. And instead of trying to help, they just see them as being part of the problem, and so they don't help either. And how many of us can see ourselves as the scribes once in a while, even though we don't want to? And that we become part of the problem. And we lack compassion and become critical and skeptics. Well, this is the situation to which Jesus returns. He's just had this great time with his disciples, and now all of a sudden he shows up and he goes from a mountaintop to the depths of pain and suffering. That's life, isn't it? And so he says, "What are you arguing about?" Well, notice who tells him. It's not the scribes. They don't jump in and start attacking him. It's not the disciples. They don't try to tell the story. They're probably embarrassed and confused and still hurt. Instead, it's the Father. And so he tells that whole sad story again. Been looking for you. I've been trying to find you. My son is desperately sick. He goes into these convulsions and stuff. And then right on cue, this arrogant demon puts this boy into this convulsion again, and he's foaming at his mouth. Becomes rigid. And what I notice is that Jesus treats this man with compassion. Now, he says first, and we don't know who he's directing the conversation to, whether he's directing it towards the disciples or he's directing it towards the scribes or the crowd. But he says, how much longer do I need to be with you all? Just been on the mountaintop, and he's been talking with Elijah and Moses about his departure. And he says, how much longer do I have to put up with this stuff, this crap that's happening? But then his attention immediately goes to the boy and the father. He says, how long has he been like this? It's been years. Since he was a child, he's been like this, and it's tried to kill him. And I notice that Jesus also shows patience with the disciples. He doesn't ridicule them because they tried and failed. He deals with them later about why it was that they failed. So let's look at this father's faith. He has sought out Jesus and couldn't find him. When the disciples try to help and fail, he doesn't give up. He doesn't go home. He could have gone home at this point, but he doesn't. His faith has taken a beating. And so when he gets to speak to Jesus, he says, if you can do anything. The doctors couldn't. The priests couldn't. Your disciples couldn't. You probably can't either. But if you can, have pity on us. You ever felt like that? His faith has taken a beating. He's just hanging on by his fingernails right now. He's treading water. And I think Jesus' response here is a pretty mild rebuke. When he says, if I can do anything. Boy, are you in for a surprise. Because all things are possible for him who believes. And so then this father prays this prayer, I believe, help my unbelief. So here's where this story hits us today and hits our world from what's happening in Paris. Is that what do we do when our faith takes a beating? What do we do when faith takes a beating? Now, this isn't all the ways that our faith can take a beating, but these are some of the ones that are most noteworthy. Sometimes our faith takes a beating intellectually. I find that this is more of a concern for young people than it is for older people, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen to older and more mature people. But there are times when your faith takes a beating intellectually. You'll hear the latest science report. You'll hear something. You'll see that the History Channel is doing another special during Easter or Christmas time on the lost books of the Bible or something that tell you that Jesus isn't really who he was and these sorts of things. And our intellect can take a beating. And we find ourselves thinking that there's a conflict between science and history and the world and what our faith tells us. And there's this conflict. So sometimes our faith takes a beating because of intellectual doubts. Most of the time I find that we can get over those. But where our faith can take a beating is when we're disappointed. And this oftentimes is an accumulation of things. It's not any one big thing. It's just being piled on over and over and over with lots of little things. So that what happens is you begin to think that God really doesn't care about you. That maybe religion works for somebody else, but it's not working for me anymore. I come to church and sometimes the sermons are kind of good, but I go home and I eat lunch and I forgot what the preacher said. And my prayer life is ineffective, and I find reading this book to be boring, and you just find yourself kind of drifting away. That happen to anybody? Do you know people that's happened? They wouldn't necessarily say that they're unbelievers, but the fire's gone cold. I believe helped by unbelief. And then you have circumstances. These are the big things. I could have put suffering down. It's when we see the suffering of others, or when we experience suffering ourselves. When our daughter gets cancer. When our mother goes into hospice. When our son dies of alcohol poisoning. And you lose it, don't you? And you can pray, I believe, but no, I don't know if I do. Because of the pain. What do you think people are feeling in Paris? How do you get over that? How do people at 9/11 get over that? You see the suffering in our world and you think, if God is all-powerful and if God is loving, how does he allow this to happen? So we have doubts. We can pray, I believe. Help my unbelief. There's nothing wrong with having doubts. If you don't have doubts, I question whether you actually have a vibrant spiritual life. Because you will be attacked. You will experience doubts. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so what do we do to combat it? Well, part of it is our understanding as to what faith is. The reason why there's the oil drum picture there is that a lot of us get it into our mind that in order for faith to be effective, we picture it like an oil drum, and we think, how much faith do I have to have in the oil drum for my faith to work? Okay? Do I have to have half full, 3/4 full? It's got to be all the way full. That makes sense? Is that how a lot of us seem to think? And so we always think, well, there's no way my oil drum is ever going to be full. And so my faith is never going to be effective. I'm never going to be able to pray for healings and have those prayers answered and those sorts of things because I can't ever, my faith will never fill the oil drum. And so we get negative feelings and defeated about it. That's a false concept as to how faith works. Faith operates at 100% capacity all of the time. And Jesus said that all you need is the faith of what? Mustard seed. I was going to bring mustard seeds in. I got some in my office. They're not very big. Mustard seeds are small. You don't need a 55-gallon drum. You just need the faith of a mustard seed because faith operates at 100% all the time. The problem isn't a faith issue. It's what we have faith in. And we have faith in the circumstances. We have faith in what's gone wrong. We have more faith in our doubts than we do in God. Does that make sense? We see the stuff around us that is happening, and we have faith in the bad news, not in the good news. And so we have doubts. Now, you don't have to check your brain at the door, okay? When you come into this building, I don't expect you, I don't want you to stop thinking and to being aware of science and math and these sorts of things, because I don't think there is a conflict between science and math and observable things and faith. But we can pray, I believe, help my unbelief. How do we do that? Now, there's lots of things here again, but here's just 3 brief ones that have helped me. The first one is history. And I don't mean personal history. I mean the history that Jesus actually happened. This isn't a myth. It's not a story. It's not in a land far, far away, once upon a time. The story of Jesus took place in Jerusalem. He was born between 5 and 6 BC in Bethlehem, and his mother's name was Mary. He grew up in Nazareth. He was baptized by John the Baptist. He began his ministry when he's about 30 years old in and around the area of Capernaum. He performed miracles. He gave sight to the blind. He cast out demons. He fed the 5,000. He even walked on water. And then in Jerusalem, about 33 A.D., he was crucified. Pontius Pilate was the Roman procurator at the particular point. Herod was the king in the northern part. And all of this is recorded in history. And not just in biblical history, it's recorded in secular history. There were historians by the name of Josephus and Tacitus, who was a Roman historian, who wrote about these things as well and said that these stories that you have heard about this Jesus, they took place and they changed people's lives. Whenever I have intellectual doubts, and I've had those, is picture a slippery slope, okay? And you start sliding down that slippery slope and you're thinking, how am I going to catch myself? I find that the cross is at that bottom of that slippery slope before you go off the cliff. And I can slip and slide until I hit the foot of that cross. And I can go no farther because that cross is rooted in history. It's an event that took place, and you cannot deny it. It's not a myth. It's not a story. It's truth. And so after I hit the foot of the cross, I can get back up, and I can start climbing back up that hill again because it's true. It's a story. And so that's the first way that I wrestle through some of the doubts that I have, is there's no problem with sliding down that hill, because when you hit the cross, you don't go off the cliff because it's historical. Secondly is experience. Oftentimes, it's easier to keep our eyes focused on what's gone wrong, and we forget about what's gone right. And we don't realize that God has been working in our life, and He has been working in the lives of other people, and He has been changing and doing things. That's why you need to hear the testimonies of other people as to what Jesus has done. It's why we need to tell people the testimonies of what Jesus has been doing in our life and in the lives of others. It's why we need to share the good news, the good stories that are happening here, because that starts to build up our faith when we realize that God is at work. He is changing lives. He does heal people. Sometimes He heals through science and medicine. I have a heart stent. I'm here because of a gifted surgeon. But God's hand was at work, both in giving that man the knowledge and knowing what to do and the skill into how to do it. Larry survived a stroke and has heart procedures that have been done. Many of you in this room have had miracles that have happened in your life, and we don't realize that God's hand was at work to bring that about. How many of you have ever had an encounter on the road where you just missed hitting somebody or being hit? And you got to thinking, what was I doing? Did you realize that you probably had a guardian angel that was working overtime? How many times have you seen little kids that probably should be dead because of stunts that they've been doing on the playground or with skateboards or something? Do you not think that God's hand is at work to protect us from the things that we have done and are doing? We just need to look around and look at the experiences. And then the last one is exercise. And I don't mean physical exercise. Faith is like a muscle, and you need to exercise your muscles to build them and to develop them. And faith is the same way. We need to exercise our faith. We need to believe God. I believe, help my unbelief is not a prayer of failure. It is a prayer of exercising one's faith. So now notice what happens. This story is a recipe for disaster. I mean, look what's happening here. This boy is in a seizure, in the midst of a seizure. The crowd is rushing up to see this thing like it's a great big circus. The father is desperately clinging on to his tattered faith. The disciples are defeated, and they're discouraged, and they don't know what's going on. The scribes are watching this whole thing, and they're all critical about this thing. And then when Jesus casts out the demon, it looks like the boy is dead. And so everybody's thinking, you killed him. I mean, he's dead, but he's not. And so you have this battle, this confrontation between the power of Jesus and the power of doubt. The boy appears to be dead, but he is not. The father's on emotional overload here. And all of a sudden, Jesus picks the boy up, and he's alive. And you can tell that the demon has left him. He's able to hear. He's able to speak. He's in his right mind, and he gives the boy to his father, and the father embraces him, and his prayer goes from being, I believe, I help my unbelief, to I believe, I believe. The scribes are silenced, and the disciples are amazed. So then they go back to the house. Jesus finally gets a chance to take a shower and to, and to unpack his bags, and they said, why could we not cast it out? And what Jesus tells them is this only comes out through prayer. And I think what he was implying is that they were relying on their own authority. They were thinking, when we cast out demons and we fed the 5,000, boy, we were good. That was us. And Jesus was saying, no, it's not you. It's the power of God working through you, and you forgot that. You were trying to do it on your own strength, your own power, your own decisions, and you forgot to pray. You were wanting God to rubber stamp it rather than going to God first and asking for his guidance and his direction. Sometimes we get ahead of ourselves, don't we? So what are the implications for us? Well, the first one is life happens. You will go from the mountaintops to the valleys. It just does. Those things will happen. Secondly is that getting your faith punched out is going to happen too. You will have doubts. Bad things will happen to you, and your spiritual life will get punched out. But there is help for unbelief. And the importance of prayer is that we can turn to God. And he will help us. And he will answer that prayer. I believe, help my unbelief. Because our faith is based on facts and truth and history. Not a myth, not a fairy tale. It's true. We're not ruled by our feelings or our emotions, but the fact that Jesus came, he rose, he died, he rose, and he's going to come again. Let's pray.